Somewhere in your home, there is evidence. Maybe it's a guitar that hasn't been touched since March, a sketchbook with 12 pages used and 40 blank, a bread-making kit still in the box, a set of watercolours, a half-finished knitting project, a camera that came out of its bag exactly twice. And if you're the person who bought all of those things, you probably have a story you tell yourself about it, that you're scattered or lazy, or that you just can't commit to anything, that there's something fundamentally unfinished about you. Here's what I want you to know before we go any further. That story is almost certainly wrong. The psychology of serial hobby hoppers, people who throw themselves completely into a new interest, ride it with genuine passion, and then move on to something else entirely, is not a psychology of failure or flakiness. It's a psychology of a very specific kind of mind, and once you understand what's actually driving the pattern, you might find that the guitar and the sketchbook and the bread kit are not evidence of your shortcomings. They're evidence of something else entirely. So let's go inside it. The first thing to understand is what's happening in your brain during that initial phase, the honeymoon period of a new hobby, because neurologically, it is genuinely extraordinary. When you encounter something new that captures your interest, your brain releases a surge of dopamine. Not a trickle, a surge. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter most associated with anticipation and reward, and new skill acquisition is one of the most reliable triggers it has. Every time you learn something you didn't know before, your first chord, your first successful sketch, the moment the dough actually rises, your brain rewards you, heavily. The learning curve is, neurochemically speaking, a dopamine curve, and it is steep and glorious and completely addictive. Here's the problem, or what looks like the problem. Dopamine is not a loyalty system. It's a novelty system. It rewards new information, new progress, new discovery, and at some point, with any skill, the learning curve begins to flatten. The rapid gains slow down. The rush of constant discovery becomes the quieter, deeper work of mastery. And for certain brains that are particularly sensitive to novelty, brains that are wired to be strongly pulled toward new stimulation, that flattening of the curve can feel like something has gone wrong, like the thing has stopped being interesting, like it's time to move on. And so they do, and the cycle begins again. Now here's where it gets really interesting, because the assumption most people make is that this is a problem of discipline or willpower, that the serial hobby hopper just needs to push through, to white-knuckle their way past the dull part, to stop being distracted by the next shiny thing. But research in personality psychology tells a more nuanced story. People who display this pattern tend to score high on a personality dimension called openness to experience, one of the big 5 personality traits. High openness is associated with intellectual curiosity, imaginative thinking, a strong appetite for new ideas and sensations, and, crucially, a lower tolerance for repetition and routine. This is not a character flaw. It is a personality architecture, and it has a long and respectable history. Think about Leonardo da Vinci, who pursued anatomy, engineering, painting, music, mathematics, and cartography, often simultaneously, often abandoning projects mid-completion. His notebooks are a monument to restless, roving curiosity. Think about Darwin, who spent years obsessively collecting beetles before pivoting to barnacles, then to evolution. Think about Benjamin Franklin, who moved from printing to politics to electricity to diplomacy to philosophy, as if each field were simply the next room in a house he was exploring. These were not people who couldn't commit. They were people whose minds were built to range widely, and the world benefited enormously from their inability to stay in one lane. There's also something worth understanding about the relationship between high openness and what psychologists call the need for cognition, the genuine drive to engage with complex, novel, and challenging ideas. People with a strong need for cognition experience the early stages of a new hobby as almost euphoric, not just because it's fun, but because it's genuinely cognitively demanding. It requires them to think in new ways, build new mental models, make new connections. That is profoundly satisfying for a mind like this. And when the cognitive demand drops, when the skill starts to feel automatic, when the mental challenge diminishes, the satisfaction diminishes with it. The hobby hasn't become boring. It's become too easy, and too easy is its own kind of uncomfortable for a brain that runs on novelty and complexity. But here's the piece that I think is most worth sitting with, the part that doesn't get talked about enough. Serial hobby hoppers are not people who never go deep. They go incredibly deep. They just go incredibly deep fast, and then they go somewhere else. And the things they accumulate across their many enthusiasms are not wasted. There's a concept that researchers and career theorists have been paying more attention to in recent years called the multipotentialite, a person who has many different interests and creative pursuits across multiple domains. Author Emily Wapnick, who has written extensively on this, argues that what looks like scattered dabbling is often something more powerful, the ability to synthesize across fields, to see connections that specialists miss, to bring a beginner's freshness to any domain they enter. The serial hobby hopper isn't building one tower, they're building a landscape, and landscapes are complex and interesting and full of unexpected terrain in a way that single towers simply aren't. There's also a practical reframe worth considering. In a culture that worships mastery and expertise, that tells us to find our one thing and go 10,000 hours deep, the person who has spent 2 months seriously learning photography, 3 months really getting into ceramics, 6 months genuinely absorbed in chess, and a year intensely focused on sourdough, has actually accumulated something remarkable. A diverse portfolio of genuine experience, a developed capacity for rapid skill acquisition, and a kind of cognitive flexibility that specialists often lack. They know how to begin things. They know how to learn from scratch. They know how to find the joy in something new. These are not small skills. They are, in many domains, the most valuable skills you can have. That said, and I want to be honest here because this video wouldn't be complete without it, there are times when the pattern does cause real difficulty. When the serial hopper is aware that their restlessness is stopping them from reaching something they genuinely want to reach, when the moving on feels less like freedom and more like escape, when they can see the commitment they want to make and something in them keeps pulling away before they get there. In those cases, the psychology points to something worth examining, not necessarily a diagnosis, but a conversation with yourself about whether the novelty seeking is serving you, or whether it's become a way of avoiding the discomfort that comes with going truly deep into anything. Because deep work is uncomfortable, not because it's boring, but because it requires you to sit with your own limitations, to progress slowly, to be bad at something for a long time before you're good at it. For a brain wired to reward rapid novelty, that particular discomfort can be genuinely hard to tolerate, and knowing that, naming it, is the first step toward being able to choose differently when you want to. So here's the question I want to leave you with, and I'd genuinely love to hear your answer in the comments. When you think about all the hobbies you've picked up and put down, the guitar, the sketchbook, the bread kit, whatever yours are, which one left something in you that you still carry? Because I suspect that the serial hobby hopper is not as empty-handed as they think. The things they learned, the ways they changed, the perspectives they gathered, those don't disappear when the hobby does. They become part of the landscape, and the landscape, as it turns out, is beautiful. See you in the next one.